Good morning, distinguished member of the panel, dear supervisor, dear colleague and guest. Thank you for being here. My name is Diarra, and I'm honored to present the founding of my doctoral research titled Climate Impact on Bacterial Meningitis Occurrence over West Africa. This study aligned with the SDG goals 3, good health and well-being, and the 13 climate actions. The presentation of today will follow this outline. First, introduction, followed by data methodology. The next one is result and discussion, and the final part is conclusion. As introduction, bacterial meningitis is an inflammation of the meninges surrounding the brain and spinal cord. It can mainly be caused by Neisseria meningitis, streptococcus pneumonia, and influenza. Bacterial meningitis can kill in less than 24 hours. For example, in 2019, the global burden disease estimated 233,000 dead, 32,000 dead among 2.51 million incidents globally. The greatest burden is observed in children under 5 years of age, particularly in the Sub-Saharan African region, described by the person in 1963. Meningitis is also a respiratory disease, highly influenced by environmental factors such as dust, relative humidity, and temperature. In this slide, we show the mechanism through which Sahara dust combined with high temperature, low relative humidity. We saw how Sahara dust combined to these parameters can influence bacterial meningitis outbreaks. The motivation of this study is, as we know, bacterial meningitis is a leading cause of neurological disorder burden globally, and the second one in Sub-Saharan region, where 300 million people among 21 countries are at risk, and that's associated with high fatality rate between 10 and 50%. So the WHO projected 360,000 dead and 400,000 people disabled can be recorded by 2030. The main objective of this study is to determine the potential role of meteorological and environmental variables impacting bacterial meningitis incidence and transmission in West Africa, a region highly vulnerable to this devastating disease. The guiding research question of this study is to show how the change in climate and environmental factors can influence meningitis dynamics across time and space. What specific objective was established? The first one is to assess the seasonal cycle of Sahara dust and environmental variable impacting the outbreak of meningitis in the Gulf of Guinea and the Sahel region. The second is to analyze at interannual variability and spatial distribution of Sahara dust and environmental variable impacting bacterial meningitis incidence in those regions. We also identify the role of large-scale atmospheric and oceanic drivers such as El Niño South Oscillation in modulating Sahara dust patterns and its influence on bacterial meningitis patterns. The last objective is to develop an artificial intelligence predictive model for bacterial meningitis outbreak by integrating climate information, surveillance data of meningitis, and the study of vaccination. Several studies highlighted the seasonal pattern of meningitis incidence and also demonstrated strong link between environmental factors and meningitis incidence. However, they focused just in the very small scale, which is district or country level. So, assuming that local environmental variables are also random fluctuation, superimposed by assuming that local condition are also random fluctuation superimposed on border large scale phenomena such as ENSO. It is crucial to analyze at large scale the relation between Saharan dust meningitis to distinguish the local drivers incidence of the disease and the influence of large scale climate pattern. So, this study aims to identify emerging meningitis incidence patterns that are shaped by this large-scale meteorological process. For that, we can move now to our second part of this presentation, which describes the methodology and data used along this thesis. Here we present our area of study. In orange, we have the West African region. In brown, we represent the West African meningitis belt. The contour in black represents our two specific climate zones, which are Sahel and Gulf of Guinea described in this thesis. The African map represents the different climate conditions in Africa. So several data associated with distinguished temporal and spatial resolution was used in this study. We also used two specific main periods, along one from 1980 to 2020, and the second one from 2006 to 2020, depending on the objective. For clinical data, we used meningitis cases from WHO for the period 2006-2020 at weekly step. And for aerosol optical dust mass density from MERA and particle matter from CAMS-WORLD also use it. We analyze data from ERA files such as temperature, relative humidity, and wind component, and SLP, combined with SST from ADIS will also use it. Through a stronger and various statistical method, we try to achieve our objective 1, 2, 3 by computing the seasonal and interannual anomalies of the different variables. We also using empirical orthogonal function known as principal component analysis, regression map, and composite analysis associated with likely correlation and statistical significant tests to achieve those objectives, which are 1, 2, 3. To achieve our core objective, our important objective using artificial intelligence methods, we selected 3 artificial intelligence methods, which are learning regression model, ensemble mean models, and long-set term memory. By assessing this data and analyze them, we can now show the key result from this study. To achieve the objective 1 and 2, as we said, we focus on the period 2006-2020, which was also divided into specific periods. The first one is 2006-2009, corresponding to the period before the application of meningitis, of vaccine against meningitis. And the second period is from 2010-2020, which is the post-vaccination. In the first column, we represent the first period pre-vaccination. In the second column, we represent the post-vaccination period. The first row represents the Sahel. The Saharan countries averaged, which is represented in dark red, the case of the Sahel, and below we represent for the Gulf of Guinea. This calculation was done between January to June at weekly step. As we can see, from the first period pre-vaccination to second period post-vaccination, we can observe a decrease of the number of cases in the Sahel. However, in the Gulf of Guinea, we have a lesser increase of the number of cases. In this figure, we represent the seasonal cycle of environmental variables related to bacterial meningitis in each area, such as Sahel and Gulf of Guinea. The first period, pre-vaccination, from 2006-2009, is represented in full line, and the second period, which is post-vaccination, is represented in dashed line. The first column represents for the Sahel zone, and the second column represents for the Gulf of Guinea zone. In black, we represent the temperature. In green is relative humidity. Dark red represents the disease in each area. In magenta, we have zonal wind. Purple represents the meridional wind. Orange represents the particle matter. And gray represents the aerosol optical depth. In this figure, we can see that the dust event in January is identified as trigger of the meningitis season in both regions and in both periods. However, we have difference in the peak of the disease. For example, in the Gulf of Guinea, we have early peak from January to March. However, in the Sahel, the peak appeared between March, April, May, when the wind component anomalies start to be positive. Now we are passing to the interannual variability of environmental variables, where just for the Sahel, for the case of the Sahel, we also did the same for the Gulf of Guinea, but it's not shown here. In the first row, we represent the relative humidity followed by temperature and zonal wind. In the second row, we have aerosol optical depth, followed by particle matter and meridional wind. The figure below represents the principal component of the leading mode of each environmental variable, also in the spatial pattern. We can see that regarding the temporal variation, we can see a clear seasonal cycle of the disease, which each peak is followed by a peak of aerosol optical depth or particle matter. And at that point, regarding the spatial distribution, we have low humidity relative and high temperature. We have also strong wind, wind bringing high concentration of dust over the Sahel, where we have high concentration in the area close to the Bordelaise Sahara depression. Here we show the same evolution pattern of the analysis, but for the period post-vaccination, which is 2010-2020. As we said earlier, we have similar patterns. Just here, the temperature, we have increase of temperature, decrease of the meridional winds, and low humidity relative, which associated with a decrease of the southern pattern of the dust concentration. So, as we highlight that environmental variables have important role on meningitis incidence, we wanted to show closely each variable, the role of each variable on the pattern of the disease by doing log correlations between environmental variable and meningitis pattern. For example, the first panel represents the Sahel, and the second one represents the Gulf of Guinea, where we fix it for the Sahel, depending on the peaks of the disease. For the Sahel, as we said earlier, the peak appear in March, April, May. So we fix it that period and do a moving correlation to see how each variable can influence in the disease evolution. The same thing is also did for the second panel, which represents the Gulf of Guinea. And as we can see that as temperature in black, so leisure, like a limited predict role in bacterial meningitis evolution. However, the other variables such as relative humidity and aerosol have significant correlation with the disease since 2 weeks late. This is the summary of the first and second objective. Meningitis peak between January and April in both areas. However, the outbreak appear with the necessary condition, which is low relative humidity, high dust concentration, and high temperature. Also, we can see that vaccine, due to the vaccination, we have a decrease in the number of cases. However, the seasonal pattern of the disease is still led by environmental variables. To pass to our objective 3, which is to study the link between meningitis and Saharan dust at large scale. Now we are working with a large scale, which is over the West Africa. For this figure, we did a regression map between the lead mode of aerosol optical depth and the disease, which is correlated in the second panel. Regarding the spatial distribution, we can see that January, February, March represents the mode of aerosol variability, and where we have high concentration in the Gulf of Guinea. The second leading mode is observed in March, April, May, with 7.5% and a shift of the high concentration towards the Sahel. Regarding the temporal pattern, we see that we have significant correlation between the first lead month of December, January, February, and the Gulf of Guinea countries. However, in the Sahel, the significant correlation was observed in March, April, May, and February, March, April, which is shown in data in this two tables. As we can see, the Gulf of Guinea disease is highly correlated with the main principal component of the leading method of aerosol optical depth in January, February. But however, in the Sahel, we have significant correlation in the leading mode of aerosol optical depth during February, March, April, May. So we selected these two modes as precursor to do the following analysis, which is here a regression map between SST, SLP, and aerosol optical depth. In the first panel, we have SST regressed with the aerosol optical depth leading mode during December, January, February, which was correlated with the disease in the Gulf of Guinea. In the middle, we represent the SLP, sea level pressure, regressed with the same leading mode, and the third one represents the aerosol optical depth, regressed with the leading mode, December, January, February, highly correlated to the disease in the Gulf of Guinea. And we can see that one SST characterizes the El Niño scene in the Pacific Ocean, is associated with high pressure level in the North Africa, which activates stronger wind blowing from Sahara to coastal to equatorial and bring a lot of high concentration of dust in the Gulf of Guinea. In this one, we did the same analysis with the previous one, but here it is a principal component lead mode of aerosol optical depth from February, March, April, which was highly correlated with the disease in the Sahel. During February, March, April, May, and March, April, May. The same pattern also is observed with warm SST in the Pacific associated with high pressure in the North Atlantic and high concentration of dust over the West Africa coastal.
But let's keep going.
So here we did composite analysis. Here we saw the composite analysis as a result from the regression map. So a signal of El Niño event in the Pacific. We did some composite analysis to look at closely the effect of ENSO and El Niño event on Sahara dust evolution. So we computed the anomaly of SST from 1980 to 2020. In a dashed black line, we have the standard deviation of the SST for Oceanic Niño index. The high variability was observed in the month of December and was also selected to represent the ENSO event. In blue, we have the Niño event, and in red, we represent the El Niño event. 5 Niño event and 5 Niño event was also detected from 1980 to 2020. So we went to look the effect of El Niño in the Sahel at local region like Sahel and Gulf of Guinea. How El Niño event in the Pacific can influence the environmental condition in the Sahel as well as in the Gulf of Guinea. Seeing that during El Niño event, where we have positive SST, we have stronger wind, zonal wind, which bring high concentration of aerosol optical depth in the Sahel during December, January, February, and thus increase in March, April, May. However, in the Gulf of Guinea, we can see that during El Niño event, stronger wind, still zonal wind is also associated with high concentration of wave dust, which is aerosol optical depth and dust mass density in orange. This is a summary of our objective 3, which show that ENSO event, especially El Niño, increased dust activity in the West Africa. Pacific and SST anomalies influence dust transport via the well circulation. Also, the teleconnection present meningitis by 1 to 2 months late. Aerosol optical depth from December, January, February, highly correlated to the disease in the Gulf of Guinea during January, February, March, while February, March, April of aerosol optical depth is highly correlated with the disease in the Sahel during February, March, April, May, and March, April, May. Now we can move to our 4 objective, which is to predict meningitis based on climate information, vaccination strategy, and surveillance data of meningitis. Here we take the case of Burkina Faso by using 9 artificial intelligence models. The figure show that based on those 9, the cat box is identified as the best model to predict bacterial meningitis at weekly scale. So we look at how each variable can influence in the model by using the SAFE model, which show that vaccination is a main variable which impact the model. However, relative humidity and wind also show a high correlation with how impact in the models. To summarize this part, we can say that machine learning successfully forecasts weekly bacterial meningitis in Burkina Faso, which box show it as a BOSS model. So vaccination studies, relative humidity and wind as key factors to predict meningitis in Burkina Faso. To conclude this study, we can say that environmental variables such as temperature, relative humidity, and wind are the key drivers of bacterial meningitis incidence in both areas, which is Sahel and Gulf of Guinea. January also, that's the event was identified as trigger of meningitis outbreak in those regions. Despite the impact of meningitis vaccination, climate variable remains the still factors drivers meningitis outbreak in these areas. Machine learning also is so to predict potential by combining environmental variables, vaccination, and meningitis to develop an early warning system. The recommendation from this study is to combine climate indicator with vaccination impact and assessment to improve preparedness, protection, vulnerable population. He also suggests to align intervention with climate factors to monitor dust, humidity, relative, and temperature, and the ENSO signal to detect early warming outbreak. The recommendation also to incorporate vaccination study and lagging environmental indicator for the routine disease forecasting. So this study contributes to establish robust climate health linked by quantifying the impact of ENSO, dust, meteorological variable, and meningitis outbreak in West Africa. It also demonstrates advances the integration of machine learning in predicting meningitis disease. It contributes also by providing a framework for climate information and health surveillance in vulnerable regions. From this study, the suggestion is to explore long-term interaction between climate and this, which are ENSO and NOAA, vaccination study, meningitis, and dust variability to investigate microbiological pathway influencing dust transport and humidity, which facilitate the spread of the disease. The suggestion is also to apply the research framework in other sensitive climate disease. So this is our achievement for this disease. We have one publication in Frontier Journal, the second accepted publication in NIMET, the third one about teleconnection will be submitted next month, inshallah. Before, this is a selective reference for this study. Before finishing this presentation, I would like to thank WASCAL, through this scholarship, the Federal University, the Federal University of Technology, Akure, University Cheikh Anta Diop, our laboratory LPAOSF, Erasmus, University Complutense, and the group Tropa. I would also thank my supervisor, my family member, and colleague for their support and encouragement. But I would also thank sincerely my monitor, I certify, one of the WASCAL batch 3, who helped me from the beginning to now. Thank you for your attention.